Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast. And this seems to be the running theme of every one of these podcasts almost. But seriously, this is somebody that was really supposed to have been here a while ago, right? So it's been like an email exchange. And somebody else connected to the center going to also pull up in here sooner than later. But so much more than just center in law and justice. Also creativity. And for show, connected to the people. Asandi, how you feeling today?
What up, though? I'm good and honored to be here with you today.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It's like melanin going, locks going, just
blackness.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love
you know
it.
how we do.
African, it's like jewelry, art. I'm with it.
Yes.
Earrings, amazing. These people like, man.
Thank you.
Fly. Super fly.
Thank you.
So, and then trying to get that summer fly in because it's about to be the bundled up mud cloth coat. I'm just
right. It's coming.
About to get winter fly.
Right.
All right. So, Detroit is different. I always start with origins. We was actually pre-gaming a little bit on some family. How many generations deep are your people to the city?
So it's interesting because I hear different stories, and I'm going to lean into my maternal side of the family because I'm more intimately familiar with that story.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I know is that my mother was not born here.
Okay.
She was born in Macon, Georgia.
Wow.
And her and her sister and my grandparents moved here in around 53 or 54.
Okay.
And however, there were other relatives who were already here. So I know that there are roots here on the maternal side in Detroit at least about 80 years ago.
Okay.
But we don't have a long generational history like many other Black families in Detroit.
So Georgia is the other key state, as I've done these Detroit, is Alabama and Georgia. They are the top running for Black folks.
Yes.
So, but Macon, Georgia.
And we still have, there are whole other roots down there that we have been able to trace back to the mid 1800s.
Okay.
And land that my family still owns and built houses on.
Okay.
So very, very proud of that. And that's following the maternal, like my grandmother's.
Okay.
My grandmother's paternal line.
So are your people still down that way?
They're still down there.
Okay.
Yeah. So the immediate family is all here, with the exception of my daughters in Texas. But we still have family there, like deep roots. We haven't had a family reunion in a while, but we're overdue. So this is a plug for that.
So
family.
For everybody with them Georgia roots.
Yes.
Them pecans, boy.
And the peaches. Pecan and peaches. And other things that will be exported out of the state up north.
Exactly. Yes. It was when people would go down south, you just come back with a bunch of stuff.
Yes. You have a list of what to bring back. Yeah, a list.
I'm guessing you've been on a car ride.
Oh, my goodness. I just got off the highway yesterday. I love highway driving, and that is very much attributed to these trips down south and up and down 75 and riding through the mountains. I love highway driving. I love it. Yeah.
Okay. And that's like I did another interview not too long ago. That's pre before you could Google Map.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Anything like that.
You would go to AAA, you get a triptych. But back then, like my grandparents didn't need it. They knew that route. They knew where to stop. We weren't navigating the green book, but we had the fried chicken in the brown paper bag. We had the sandwiches because you were only stopping to get gas. And when you stop to get gas, you use the bathroom. And you keep it moving. Okay,
so now that's also a different cultural experience. Driving with your grandparents. What was so now we leaning into this story. What was the playlist?
I was hoping you were going to ask that because I remember particularly my grandfather, who we called Papa, who's been an ancestor for 2 decades. He had a CB radio, so he could communicate with the truckers so they could look out for the police. Or the state troopers. but he had 8 tracks. And so very, for real, so we were listening to blues. And one of the lessons that I still have is the person that I still live by is the person that's driving controls the radio. They control the music. And it is important for that driver to be good and have what they need. And if you sit in the front seat, you are the co-pilot. You cannot go to sleep if you're in the front seat.
The way that story was just told, I can only imagine this may have been a parental lesson.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But I tell people now, like if we take a road trip, like I'm not getting on the highway without music. Like I need that music. So there would be times when my grandfather would drive. We knew we were listening to blues. We knew that. Okay, wait. Or now, country.
Between me and you. Okay, wait. We coming back for some country. But between me and you, anybody that knows me knows, first off, I love throwing that in jam, and I miss that. But I'm seeing them soon. But I love blues.
Okay. I didn't know that.
What blues we talk? Because it's different arcs of blues. And I'm more of a Bobby Bland guy than a B.B. King guy. But I love B.B. too. B.B.'s amazing.
He listened to both. So the story that I was told, because I don't remember this, but when my grandparents moved for a while, they stayed on Philadelphia Street. Yep, Philadelphia Street with my Uncle Jimmy and my Aunt Daisy.
Okay.
Before they moved to the Eastside in a community adjacent to Conant Gardens. They were off 6 Mile in DeQuinder. But they had renovated their basement. So there was a bar in the basement. And that's where my grandfather would hang out and play his records.
Okay.
So I was told that, I don't know, I guess I was around 1, that, because I spent a lot of time over there. And so I was in the basement with my papa, and he was playing Jimmy Reed. And I started walking, listening to Jimmy Reed.
Ain't that something?
That's what I was told.
Now that Jimmy Reed, that's some for sure.
Yeah,
that's some for sure. That's down home. Right. That's down home. Like
for real.
That's it really what it sounds like. Your granddad was the DJ.
Yeah, actually I didn't even think about it, but yeah, like he would be down, and if we like holidays or whatever, we in the basement, he playing his records. He was playing his records, and I have some of his records. I'm fortunate to have. Okay. There was also some jazz. I didn't recall him listening to jazz, but I found like a Charlie Parker. Okay.
Bird, I like that.
Yeah, and it's an album that he did. I don't know if it was, I can't remember the other art, but like 2 iconic
artists,
jazz, and I have that album.
Okay, cool.
It's from his collection. So
cool.
He was a DJ. I didn't even think about it like that.
Yeah, see,
he was spinning record.
Yeah, he was
spinning record.
He was DJing with one table, so you really was on point. You had to know. Right. So I'm guessing a lot of trust was in your granddad.
Oh yeah,
keep the party going.
Yes,
keep the people a drinking.
Yes, and the cards playing.
Okay. All right. So with that, we already got kind of Philadelphia and Conant Gardens. Conant Gardens, I'm guessing, is what you remember most growing up.
So, yeah. So my grandparents lived in their house on St. Aubin, I think for about 60 years. So after my grandfather became an ancestor, a few years later, my grandmother was finally ready to move and moved into a senior living complex. But I still live in that general area. So I'm still on the Northeast side. I love that community. I'm there by choice. Yeah. And I still have my uncle, my grandmother's son, lives also in that area. He's actually in Conant Gardens.
Wow.
So our roots are still there on purpose, by choice.
Well, shout out Conant Gardens area. Everybody that knows that, I immediately think Persian and also the hilarious Martini Harris, as he always be shouting out Conant Gardens and so much more. Like, just that community is also like the Mongolian. It's a little bit. It's Detroit is different. That neighborhood is different.
Yeah,
the
neighborhood is different. And the history of that neighborhood is really interesting as well. So
rest in peace, Sam Fiddler.
Yes.
Bubs too. Just that whole, I'm always thinking this is a little bit different. What was it like growing up for you?
So it's interesting because I have lived east and west. So for a short time, probably the first 10 years of my life, I was on the west side.
Whereabouts?
I don't remember the first house, but the last place I remember
Yeah.
living, where I know we spent a number of years, was on Abington Street between Plymouth and Chicago and Southfield and Greenfield.
Okay, so like the Cody neighborhood.
Yeah, that was Cody. So, but we moved from over there, I think, when I was 10. So, but I remember being there, and I really loved that neighborhood. And there was diversity in that neighborhood. I remember having Hispanic or Latino neighbors, white neighbors, going over neighbors' houses, and like the old school. I remember that. And then we moved, stayed with my grandparents for a couple of years. My parents got divorced, and then I moved to a different part of the East Side, between Outer Drive and 8 Mile, not far from like Farwell Middle School, between Mound and Ryan.
Okay.
And so from there, we were there 5 years. And while we were there, I finished middle school at a private school, but I went to Osborn.
You went to the Bourne.
I went to the Bourne. We were closer to Persian, but my mother was like, absolutely not.
Hilarious.
So I ended up at Osborn, and while I did not want to go there, it was her decision for me.
Yes.
Was appropriate. It was the best decision.
To go to for a mom to, that's kind of like, I chose not to go to Central. Because when we moved to Russell Woods, I'd have been hanging around all these 12th Street people all day and crossing Dexter, and went to Northwestern. It's almost like to go to Osborn instead of Persian is like going to Northwestern over Central. And shout out to the Coats, mighty Coats. but still, it's definitely one of those places. And Osborn got its own character.
Oh my goodness, I tell people I would go back to high school in a minute. I loved. We had extraordinary teachers. At the time, they had a program called Omega. I forgot what it was an acronym for, but it was a college prep program. A number of the friends that I have, I met in high school.
Wow.
Still hold those friendships. Just like part of my radicalization was at home, but also happened at Osborn.
Cool. Okay.
I just learned a lot, and just am so grateful. Like my independence, discovering my voice, in many ways started at that school.
Okay. Who were some of these teachers that connected?
So I had a journalism teacher, because I was going to be a journalist, was the dream. Her name was Elizabeth Natter. I had I think he was an American history teacher, Mr. Aswad Issa. I don't know if he's still teaching, but Mr. Issa was the man. I appreciated him, but I didn't appreciate him as much as I should have until I got out of there. Just teaching us about John Brown. Like, I remember him really teaching us, I don't know if he used the language, but about Black and American history that you didn't often hear about beyond MLK. So, just extraordinary. I had Mr. Calico, I think was my world history teacher, Miss Tucker for science. I just had some really great teachers there.
And then with it, because you definitely, like, we talking Osborn, you talking black folk.
Yes.
So to be a dynamic teacher there and connect with messaging, it's a different type of pour in than like being at, I don't know, like a Cranbrook or something like that. And no offense to that experience either, but
absolutely.
At Osborn, connecting with the student, it's almost like being a comedian walking into a hostile environment or something. It's like and then to get those hearts and minds and grab them.
And and all the teachers were different. I remember Mr. Gates taught us English, and I remember being introduced to different books that I don't know that I would have ever read, and him really challenging us. So I feel like at that time, not only did we have dynamic teachers, they were able to connect and bring who they were, and show up in the classroom, whether that was being more stern or sarcasm, because we had some sarcasm. I recall Mr. Gates being sarcastic as hell, but it worked. So you had that connection, and I definitely felt this genuine interest in our learning and our growth and development. So I had a great education.
So in journalism, you spoke to, what connected you to journalism?
I love I still love to write. While most of my writing these days are emails,
Mm-hmm.
I love to write. And so as a little girl, I don't know if you remember this, but like back in the day before, you didn't have a lot of Black newscasters back in the day, in the 70s when I grew up. So I really wanted to be a TV broadcast news journalist. That's what I wanted to be. So probably when I was around maybe 7, 8, 9. So you had Doris Biscoe, you had Beverly Draper, you had these Black women on TV. We had several of them. Diana Lewis, which was like exceptional. I was like, oh, I want to do that. So in Latchkey, me and my best friend, Concetta Lewis, at the time, we would write our own news stories and sit at a table similar to this
Wow.
and be doing our own news broadcast.
Wow.
And I was like, this is what I wanted to be. And then, you grow up and you develop some insecurities. And I was like, no, I don't want to be on camera. So even this is a big deal for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be on camera, but I still want to write. And so I was like, oh, print journalism. I wanted to be a columnist. The dream was to move to Chicago and work for the Chicago Tribune.
Ain't that something?
That was the dream.
So then, and I often talk about this too. One of the first English lessons that I had was to read a newspaper article and give who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, I often say this where like back then, media, because you don't have internet media and social media and content creation, it was so different then.
Yes.
Whereas I do consider myself a pretty smart person when it comes to that, but most articles I couldn't. It would stomp, I think, some of the most brilliant people to answer those questions. But that was like lesson 101 early, how you learn and quote unquote reading the newspaper at a third grade level. You're going to get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. And the only opinions were in editorials, whereas things mesh and become more editorialized. Were you one of those avid newspaper readers at that age?
No, which is so funny you mentioned that because I despised reading the newspaper. So the fact that I wanted to be a journalist really, it really didn't make sense. And I remember being required to read the newspaper, and I was like, it was not interesting to me.
Because back then, if people get like, the newspaper was so straight of who, what, where, when, why, how. Nothing like I mean, we could almost pull up a headline. It'll be like, I don't know, like a presidential election. The debate, who do you think will matter? Like, that's not how it would be written now. Back then, it would be like, the debate will be this date, this day, the Republican and the Democratic nominee will face off in a debate forum where they're going to cover these 4 topics. It will air at this time.
Yeah, it was certainly less sensationalized. And then what I really was curious about, I wanted to hear people's opinions. And I wanted to voice my opinion. I was like, oh, you really, but I didn't realize that until I got to college. Like, oh, I don't want to be a journalist. I want to be a columnist.
So during this time is like kind of the mesh more so, with the columnists, with editorials and everything. Kind of your stint in your lifetime, you've seen it flip because back then so much of the newspaper was just so built on like not giving any news. Like those, like the newscasters I remember most as a child, the Brokaw, the Koppel, the Jennings, like almost very stoic, as if it would be like, the president was shot today.
Yep.
The Dow Jones is down 3 points, whereas now everything is so personality, emotion, like where it's almost so much personality, you don't even know, like it's so many times where a story will happen now and you just want to know, okay, what happened before I want to watch all these opinions of what happened.
Yeah.
In this space, it's completely.
It's different. I don't even I stopped watching the news probably maybe 15 or so. I just stopped. But I stopped because I would get up in the morning, turn the TV on, watch the news. And then I realized, and it may have been even longer than that, that I have some empath quality. So I was like, I'm starting my day with all of this negativity. And then I would end my night watching the news. I was like, just stop.
It's interesting you
Just
speak
stop.
to that. As often in journalism, they say if it bleeds, it leads. Because yes, you're right. Even, I'll try to sometimes turn it on to just get a local forecast. But even before the local forecast, I'm going to hear about some shooting, I'm going to hear about some violence in my community usually. And it's going to be like, man, because I don't know what's going on now. It's like, light-skinned dudes with crazy afros seem to be. If you're a light-skinned man with a crazy afro, brother,
Oh,
the news is gonna have your mugshot on TV. So it's like, what is going on here? But it's these iterations, and you're right. How does that incept and it go on? And I also think that creates the heightened sense of fear of so many of the elders, because when they talk so much about crime and living in the community I live in, the streets are hiring. I ain't gonna give up.
Right. The streets are hiring.
The streets are hiring.
Sure.
But usually the streets hire people that are connected to the streets. Like the quote that Mayor Kilpatrick used to often give. It's like 80% of the crime happens to people connected to criminality. So if you avoid criminality, which I know some people seem like it's harder to do, then you're probably going to avoid a lot of crime.
Good. Yeah, you're probably good. I tell people jokingly, like, if some shit pop off, I don't need you to stop, but text me on your way out, because I'm going to miss it. Like, my sources of news are very limited on purpose. So, like, if something happens that I probably don't know. And that has happened where it hasn't been major, but things have happened or like major events that I was totally oblivious to. I get a call or a text message like, if it's time to be out, something's going on in this or whatever, send me a text while you on your way out so I can go, and because I probably won't know what's going on.
Because especially like where you stay, like Conant Gardens, similar to my 12th Street neighborhood, is one of those communities people like, you over there? That's the red zone. Like, I don't know, like about 10 years ago, like I want to say, I even forget what, I think it was Gangland came and did something over there, and it just made it the red zone, and Gangland is so ridiculous. Yeah. But it's back to those communities, and a lot of people I know have been there for generations.
On my block, like many of the streets, I can't say all of that neighborhood, but on my block, most of the people have inherited their homes.
Exactly.
So when I moved, I think they were looking at me when I moved over there. Like, y'all don't know me, but I got roots. So I had another aunt and uncle that lived around the block from me, and they were there at least probably 35, 40 years. So I was like, y'all haven't seen me, but I got roots.
Yeah.
I got roots.
Yep. And one-on-one, live in the hood, just stay to yourself, be cool, be kind, and everything.
Yeah. And I have good neighbors. Like,
be swimming.
I have good neighbors, so I can't, folks look out, folks will help. Like, I have good neighbors.
So in this, back to like, I guess that path in journalism, but writing. So what was the writing that you poured into more so?
Once I took my first journalism class at Wayne State. I was like,
can't do it.
This ain't it. I will be miserable if I have to do
that.
The what, when, where. Nope, I'm not doing that. So somehow or another, I don't recall, but I got introduced to like marketing and public relations. It's like, oh, that's a path where I can use my creativity, because I used to be a poet, but not a performance poet. So I was like, there's this creative energy in me that doing PR or marketing would allow me to tap into. So I was like, well, I can pursue that. I can pursue that and make a career out of that, which was the intent. I did an internship at a marketing communications company that was located in Dearborn. At the time, I was working for the YMCA full-time. I was going to school at that point, part-time, and working full-time at the YMCA, where Comerica Park, like way back YMCA, where Comerica Park is now, used to be the downtown YMCA, and the corporate offices were upstairs, and I was working for one of the senior VPs. And that was my first nonprofit job, which I had no intention on. That was
connecting.
That I had no intentions. I didn't even know really what nonprofits were.
Mm.
So I did this internship and was there for about 3 months. Was really working hard to kind of turn that into a permanent position. There was nothing available, but they reached out to me a few months later. It's like, we had this opening, this entry-level opportunity. I took it, and they wanted me to work on an account that was really providing some communications and fundraising for Detroit PAL. And so
kind of sports again,
so
and
like
nonprofit.
sports and nonprofits. They were like, we know you've been working at the Y. And I was picking up things just by being in the space, but not intentionally absorbing or learning or paying attention. But I understood like some things about how the United Way worked back at that time, how you do re-granting. So I understood some things. So I said, okay, like, great, whatever. And so that really kind of pushed me into nonprofits and fundraising and marketing and communications.
Wow.
And that really set me on unknowingly the career path that I'm on now. It really did.
So technically, for everyone to know, the nonprofit is very much like a for-profit, sometimes more aggressive in this region, but fundraising is paramount in it. So like to connect to that is key. So you were entering into basically like the suite of every nonprofit leader walking up to you like, I need that.
But I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I don't even know if they called it. I don't know what language they were using. But the reality was that we were doing annual campaigns, but we weren't calling it annual campaigns. We were doing donor solicitations, started to think about major gifts, planning special events at the time. PAL was one of the charities that was participating in the auto show charity preview. So like making sure that we sold tickets and folks would select PAL as their charity of choice, because it was very different than what it is now. But it was a significant fundraiser. And at the time, PAL didn't have like an executive director at the time that I was working there, and they had a mix of police and civilian staff.
So everything about it in this era of the start is not where things stand now. You're watching it develop. Yeah. And are you still in school at the time?
So nope. I was like, I got a job. I'm good. You know, I don't need to. I'm like, I'm good.
I'm working.
And I was not having, despite currently being employed by Wayne State now, I was not having a good experience at that school. And at that time, I saw many of the people that I was in school with had stopped going. Very few had graduated undergrad. I was like, I just was like, this is not it.
Which we're gonna open up and we're gonna discuss that, because I have to bring it up because it's such a big topic. So for people that watch this that aren't in Detroit, Wayne State is located in the center of, it's in the city. And Wayne State's history with Detroit, like all institutions in America, the racial relationship between black folks and the institution is not the best. The iteration of one of my mentors, Chokwe Lumumba, Jeffrey Edison, and many of them that were taking they're going through the law school and what they face, to very well known the fight to get the Black Studies Department there, and the protests and lock-ins, when we think of Daryl Dawsey and many others that were associated, Errol Henderson and many others associated with that, and even like a interview I did with Shelley McIntosh, like Wayne State, like many institutions. So I'm not taking Wayne State and making it seem like, they
are not unique.
Many institute, like I don't think of any American institution in working with black people where it's like, oh, that's where black people were. That is anything that could be constructive for community. It just is the design of what America is. And it permeates throughout. Even when we think of, at the time, Wayne State's president, David Adamany, that ends up transitioning to be one of the first people that take away the right to vote when we think of the Detroit School Board, and one of the deals to sell Detroit public school property to Wayne State that seemed to be very what's going on. But a lot of stuff like that was happening in the exploration, but also during this time, that relationship. So things have shifted and things still need to strengthen and be better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned, so I talked about in high school, like there was some radicalization happening in my home, but also in high school. When I got to Wayne State, so I was a part of the study-in. I was a freshman. That was my freshman year. And
One second, time out. You were there as a freshman?
Yeah, I was there. I was a freshman. Wow. It was April 89. I started in the fall of 88. And I thought that it was just going to be a couple of days. Like I had been coming to meetings. And while I knew some people at school, I was very much kind of in many ways how I move now. Like lay back in the cut. I'm watching. I'm listening though. And I'm observing. And I'm down. Like you may not hear my voice, but I'm down. I'm there. I'm showing up. So I remember, and so that also, even in the work I do now, that's still, I bring that history with me to the work that I do at the Detroit Equity Action Lab. But I remember thinking like, okay, this might be a couple of days. So was a little prepared for the study-in. I didn't expect it to be, I think, the 11 or 12 days that it was. But it was a pivotal moment in my life. And definitely demonstrated for me for actually a second time the power of collective action, like for real collective action. And so when I meet students, I met someone not too long ago who earned their bachelor's in African studies or African American studies. And I was like, I always feel that sense of pride.
And I don't know if people can kind of make the cultural connection, and that's what I love about Detroit is different, that I can layer so many people's different stories now because I can add you to the mix and different people's story. Gary that leads Plowshares, he was in that mix. So like,
oh wow, and because there were over 100 of us,
and Ken Cockrell Jr., which brought out Ken Cockrell Seniors in that mix, and his wife, and many of these other people, and their supporters, Tafari Brent, Chaos and Maestro are down there, like the Aisha Shoelace Pyramid Performing Theater are doing African dancing and drumming, which is...
I just found out you went to the Shoelay.
Yeah, I'm a Shoelay kid.
There's multiple connections.
Yeah, I'm a Shoelay kid, and that protest is what led Baba Kimfense, that now Dr. Kimfense, at Wayne State, to say, this is where I want to go. But if, like, when these connections that become so strong, even connected to a lot of the student walkouts in the late 60s, early 70s that were happening throughout Detroit public schools to create Black studies departments and Black history classes there. Like, it's a premise that permeates in this protest culture that a lot of them were like, yeah, we got to stand tall and with it, because it was support from so many of your parents that knew, nah, we supporting this. But still seeing in a Black city a deadlocked organization that stands and feel as though they can operate independently, and it completely changed.
It was extraordinary.
So I definitely, that's one of the many, I really want to do like some documentary on that, because I don't know how many people really know that story and how powerful that was. So
it was extraordinary. I had wanted to write a book about it, so I was like journaling. I was saving all of at the time the South End. Really, it was decades ago. So I would save the page because I knew, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but I knew it was significant. I knew we were making history. Unfortunately, and those notes and things got damaged in my parents' basement. But I was like, we need to be documenting this. We need to be, this is a significant moment. I may not remember all the things. I would love to see something come out of that. And I would love to see more.
I definitely want to lean in, but now I got to ask you the question. While you're going there and you say, it's not feeling right, what was it like for just the regular professors,
So part of the
disconnect or whatever.
Yeah, one of the things that we were fighting for was to get the Black professors tenure. So You had, at the time, Mama Aneb, Dr. Gloria House was a professor there. You had Patricia Coleman Burns. Those were the two that I really remember, but you had some other professors who were there who were clearly hitting obstacles. They weren't getting tenure. And we are talking some badass professors, not like mediocre, like, oh, they Black, we just gonna uplift them. No. I mean, and if anybody know, both of those women are extraordinary women.
Yes.
And so that was one of the things that we were fighting for. So while the school was conveniently located, I never felt like it was a place for Black people. And so because I was able to get into what I thought was my career without the degree, I was like, I'm good. I'm good. Because I was like, I don't know that there were so many barriers, systemic barriers built into the graduation requirements. I was like, I don't know if I'll ever get out of here. And I was hearing similar things from other Black students who chose to tap out. And because we were commuting, you didn't have all the residential facilities you had now. And so everybody was working.
Yeah.
Everybody was working to go to school. So if you could work and you making it do what it do, there were some of us that chose not to continue. So I was one of those until I hit a ceiling, I should say, or a wall, and I couldn't move because I didn't have this paper.
The paper.
I didn't have this paper. So I didn't go back to Wayne, but I ended up finishing at the University of Phoenix early when they were here. So I was going to their Southfield campus for classes because I was like, I just need the paper to get done, and then I can get a master's in what I really want to do.
And I'm one of those people that get my degree later as well. And being an older student is, for me, I needed to be an older student because for my presence of mind. Yeah. What was it like for you?
So my path was to go to Michigan State, work for the state news, and then I was going to Chicago.
Yeah,
I had no intent. That was
the plan.
That was the plan. I don't believe I even applied anywhere else. I was going to Michigan State. Everybody knew that I was going to Michigan State. That's all I talked about. So I ended up at Wayne because they had a Journalism Institute for Minorities program, which they still have now, but it's different, where Black and brown students could get a full ride excluding your books. There was no housing, but your tuition was paid. And I had to apply. My mother made me do it. My journalism teacher, Miss Natter, was like, you need to do this. But my mother said, you don't have to go if you get the scholarship.
Yeah.
So you had to interview as part of the process. And I remember interviewing with the director. I think her name was Ruth Seymour, and showing up 17 with an attitude because I didn't want to be there. Just probably disrespectful. And clearly she was able to see through that and offer me the scholarship anyway.
Wow.
And my mother was like, financially, it just didn't make sense to not go. And so part of, I think, how I showed up as a student was to be rebellious because I did not want to be there. I also I didn't have the maturity. I was a good student at Osborn, but college just allowed this freedom. Even as a commuter school, it just allowed this freedom that I hadn't experienced. So I could go to school and not go to class.
Yeah.
So the Student Center building was where I spent most of my time. And I wasn't disciplined. I hadn't developed study habits. I wasn't motivated. I was taking some bullshit classes some of those classes, I was like, why do I have to take these classes? So I was not ready. In hindsight, I was not ready. So being an older student, when I finally went back, I had already had a kid, and I was like, I need to get this done before she starts school. I was like, I want to get done before she starts kindergarten, and I was able to do that.
Wow.
I didn't get my degree till I was 30.
Wow. And in it's a different type of focus of everything. And just the interview, a rap, like, working in school, it's working in groups in school and everything, like, the focus becomes more clear. The part of, I think, college is also knowing, like, the studying, knowing what you should take, what you shouldn't take, going through, for lack of a better term, going through some bullshit, but just knowing how to complete it.
Yes.
Like, that's a process that you go through. And it means something. As I have like a running joke with my project managers who said, it's like, everybody that's always like, I'm 1 credit away. When you work with them, you find out it's like, I know. I know why you 1 credit away.
Right.
You 1. I know.
In many ways.
No, because it's and it's so, because it becomes such a natural selector, because, it's already so scarce for opportunity. The first thing they're going to say, you got a degree or not? And then it's like, if your resume just gets tossed just because of that, knowing you're more brilliant, or somebody like you working in the field, I assume you would be in it, but end up probably with so much less money, less opportunity, less authority, less position, but still have all the know-how. So it's like, let's go on and do this and check this box.
Yep. So I did, and I'm glad I did, because it allowed me to do and study in my grad school experience what I wanted to.
And it gets the chip. I know for me, it got the chip off my shoulder of always feeling like, I got to work double time without,
Yeah, the story we
having
narrative
our mind,
we tell ourselves.
Often like, I ain't got no, I don't need no degree, and and it's like, I didn't even say you do or don't. You know what I'm saying? But it feels that way when you don't have it.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
So in that, still in the mix, where you go for your master's is you say, like, okay, now I really want something I'm passionate about.
Working in nonprofits has had its ups and downs, at least in my career.
Yeah.
So I have been laid off several times. So you probably also don't know that I worked at Nsoroma Institute twice.
Okay.
So I have either been in education, K-8 or higher ed, or I've been in nonprofit.
Okay, so let me also add this, as my very first interview was Baba Malik, and Baba Malik starts off, the very first Detroit is different of, don't start no school if you ain't got no money. So, now, with that being said, I just talked about, like, it's layers of business. It's like business, and then it's like business culture and hustle culture. Like, business culture is you make a plan, you think long term. Hustle culture is I want to maximize as much money as I possibly can get now. In the mix of that, it's also African-centered business, which is a mesh of community and business. And as much as hustling ain't business, community, and I do a lot of community business, it's so much more of a collective thought for how to make a decision. Collective thought for what the expectations of the decision to be made. Collective thought for who will be recipients of whatever it is. But usually when it comes to getting the money in, it ain't as collective.
Yeah, it's that's a very, if you haven't been in that African-centered education community as a student, a teacher, a staff, it is a culture unto itself. It very much was, the time that I worked there was very much a continuation of my education. Like that's those students and staff and those parents, that's family.
Yeah.
That is family for sure. And still, even though the school has been closed, I think it was a decade. I think it closed a decade ago. That's still family.
Yeah.
That's still family. So I mention that because the nonprofit and education, both of those have been like ups and downs for me. So in different roles, I really leaned into roles as fundraising, whether it was event fundraising or just a straight out fundraiser. But when we have national economic hard times, like in 2008, so I had been laid off there. I had been laid off at the school because we had to move. So our core demographic of, like, we moved away from where we had been for a number of years. So that impact the student enrollment. Enrollment is money. So I have had this, while love in terms of my career in nonprofit, it has very much been up and down. So one of those kind of lows where I went back to the YMCA. At that time, it was the new building, the Downtown Bowl Family YMCA.
Mm.
I was their annual campaign manager, raising money for the particular, the downtown branch. And I think this was in 2009 here. And so there had already been some layoffs, but I thought I was good. I had exceeded my fundraising goal. I'm good. No. So I get laid off. And the day that I got laid off, I was scheduled to go to an open house at U of M Dearborn for their MPA, Masters of Public Administration program. And while I was distraught, I was like, fuck it, I'm going anyway. Because I don't have a job right now. That doesn't stop me from pursuing this degree. And I did. I went to the open house and learned, and I was like, okay, let me think about what I really need to be doing. At that time, my daughter was going into high school. And so I needed to figure out what the plan and the timing would be, because once again, I didn't want to be in college when she would be in college, just like I didn't want to be in college when she was starting her education as a kindergartner. So I was like, well, if I can go and get done before really her senior year, so I can be present for that and help her,
Yeah.
then I'm gonna do that, and I did it. And I'm glad I did that. It was a great, But again, I'm an adult. I'm good and grown. I got a kid. And I was studying something that I was genuinely interested in and that I could apply.
And also, not only you apply, but you're in the class doing case studies like me in business school, and you're speaking from real life experience versus what the textbook is saying.
Yes.
Because the textbook, especially when it comes to like something like, fundraising or getting people, it's going to say, well, you just give 10 people a task and give them instructions. You like, hey, no, that don't work.
That is not how.
That don't work at all.
That is not how that go down in real life. Yeah, it's a little bit more complex than that.
You send an email to a donor and they're going to send you a check. No.
I wish it was that simple. Yeah. So that was a great decision. Did that. And then I ended up was at the school, had got laid off, ended up coming back to the school under in a different role, and really my career has just taken me from, when I think about, I've worked at PAL, I've worked at YMCA, Matrix Human Services, I worked at Mosaic for a minute, different places, and I've been at Wayne for a decade.
And Wayne, what brought you back to Wayne? And let's talk.
So it's so interesting because when I left, I was like,
never coming back.
There is no reason for me to come to this university.
Yep, you'd be
anything.
Be driving down Woodward and Warren like,
I'm
Deuces.
good. I'm good. Deuce. I'm good. Yep. I'm good. So I came back because I don't know if you remember this. But this was in 2000, I don't remember, 2000, I don't remember when it was. But Wayne State had created this newly formed Office of Economic Development. And out of that department, they had launched a new fellowship program, the Detroit Revitalization Fellows Program. And so Regina Ann Campbell was in the first cohort of that fellowship program, and I remember it launching. I wish I could remember the exact date, but I want to say it may have been. It was mid 2000, so we're late. Yeah, I can't remember the exact date, but I'm gonna guess 2012. I'm gonna say 2012. So when they created this fellowship program, I think at the time I was looking for opportunities. And I remember my mother sharing it because my mother is a newspaper reader. So I remember her sharing that opportunity with me. She was like, this sounds like you should do this. And I was like, okay. So I applied for the fellowship. I just say they don't want me because they didn't. But later I'd end up working there.
Mm.
So what was interesting to me is, and I mentioned Regina because there were not a lot of Black folks from Detroit in this first cohort of the fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they did not, they declined my application, I followed what was going. I just was curious, like, who did they end up picking? I was curious about that. And I was like, oh, when I looked at the folks and the organizations they worked at and where they were coming from, I was like, oh, they weren't checking for me.
Yeah.
I was not who they were looking for, so that makes sense. So they had posted a couple of positions, this particular program, and Ambra Redrick, who we know, the CEO of Teen Hype, was in Leadership Detroit with the person, Greg Donnelly, who was leading the fellowship at the time. And at that time, I was on Teen Hype's board. And somehow or another, we got in this conversation about that position. I had met Greg because he was volunteering on a committee that I was chairing. And so I was like, I just want to let you know, just a heads up, if you see my resume, I'm applying. They had 2 openings. And I didn't think really much of it because I had applied to positions at Wayne out of desperation, just some full transparency. And the university's I'm going to just say the university has a reputation where you submit an application and you never hear anything. So you don't know what happened. So I didn't have high expectations, even though I had met Greg. We didn't really have a relationship. So he says, okay, I'll make sure I take a look at it. I get an interview. I'm like, I'm really more interested in this strategy leader position than this other position, which worked out perfectly. And I go through this intense interview process and I get the job.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm like, well, I didn't get into fellowship, but the next best thing is to be able to be a part of the team that's running the fellowship and be able to contribute in that way. So I joined them in 2014. And actually, I think the fellowship was founded in 2000, may have been 2010. So I joined them, later get promoted, and really unknowingly, we are doing racial equity work there, but we're not explicitly calling it racial equity work. So you look at the first cohort of fellows from the first cohort of Detroit Revitalization Fellows, or what we would call DRF, so you look at the last cohort, and it's very different.
Yeah.
On purpose. We started to shift how we were recruiting and the outreach that we were doing. We became more intentional about it being reflective of Detroit and acknowledging, like, Detroit, this is a Black city. This opportunity should reflect that. And also acknowledging and valuing the talent that was here, and not at the time like, oh, you need to bring people in to come save Detroit.
Yeah.
And so we collectively shifted that. And I'm very proud of that work. So did that for about 6 years. And then transitioned. I had already been doing consulting and the intent was to lean into that full time to build my consultancy, Say It Right. And Peter Hammer, who we know, who's the faculty director of the Damon J. Keefe Center for Civil Rights at the law school. So it's also very interesting acknowledging the history of the law school, that they have this Civil Rights Center. Is also really interesting. And it's interesting to me as a former student, to be working in that center. But Peter and I knew each other, but not well at all.
Yeah.
And he knew I had transitioned and reached out and was like, we're going to be posting a position, maybe think about applying. I'm good with Wayne State. Again, I'm done with Wayne State. But clearly, the universe was like, not today.
Yeah.
You got more work to do over there. And that was for the position that he was interviewing for, was for the director of the Detroit Equity Action Lab. And while the lab is a racial equity leadership development program housed in the Keefe Center, we really operate in many ways. And we are Wayne State employees. We adhere to Wayne State's policies and guidelines. but we are fortunate to operate with some autonomy, and in many ways like our own little nonprofit, because we raise our own money. Our fellowship program is for the community, so we don't interface with students at all. It's really about the community, and pouring into and equipping racial equity leaders with tools.
I love that you eloquently said that story instead of writing it, even though I think it'd be written beautifully as well.
Thank you.
And you piece so much together. That's where like people always say I talk so much in my podcast, but it wasn't nothing else to add. And I also appreciate that you talk about the development of a concept, because oftentimes the design of America, just due to the socioeconomic, political positioning of things, definitely leave a lot of our people on the outside because the design was never designed for us. With that, this is the tough thing, at which people will say, "All right, look, you sounded like a person on the other side." I'm not going all the way Booker T. Washington for folks, but part of that design is the unknown, and as things shift, and things have not shifted enough to resource our community at all. But as things shift, opportunities begin to present themselves that didn't exist before. So at that time of those protests, there were many programs in engineering and automation because the pockets were looking like the opportunities here were built around the ideas of the automotive industry. So things like Detroit Equity Action Lab come up and are birthed from the inception of people such as yourself and many of the other people that have been incepted of these ideas of like, okay, see, before we even move to automation, or AI, or whatever, we need to work out some of these things going on to get equity amongst everything else, because if they can't focus on the disparities that exist that they're facing, they're not going to be able to onboard for what you think is productivity in a workplace. So the design and the birthing of something like that on a college campus, and this is vital, as I know the person that only thinks engineering brain and in school should only have math and science thinks this shouldn't exist. This is vital because all of these institutions, as much as it definitely was a George Floyd moment that impacted anything associated with black people at the time, you know, where white folks is calling you like, I want to apologize for my racism. And it's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about, Andrew? But beyond that, the moment in the time now, if you're not leaning into where something is more progressive, than where you're staying static. And if you're staying static, you can't function and you're not going to thrive in what's happening today. And what's staying static, as we talk about the cultures of things being organizational leadership, almost every business wanted to be like General Motors. So that impacted all of the schools here and everything else. And basically having a meeting for 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 a meeting. And then the automotive companies, like I tell people, it's like the people that do the best in this new design of cars aren't going to come here because they don't function in the organizational function of how the automotive companies function here. You know, as strange as Elon Musk is, he's closer to what the car designers of today are like, where I'm going to live in Estonia for 3 months and I'm going to come in through Slack and we're going to talk through Midjourney about how we're going to send graphics in 4-dimensional imagery to one another. That is not that's the functionality of it.
Yeah.
And new cultures are created. And the Equity Lab is creating a new culture where obviously I'm sure I've seen it. You see a lot of these other organizations mimicking it, which means you're doing good.
Yeah.
Because clearly they got to mimic it, because when they're looking at who's giving money and if they can stay viable, they're getting the same old two-step, and people are like, we not rocking with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you referenced the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor murders in that moment. And I often remind people, because there's so many people who have never heard of Deal, that Deal, we're celebrating 10 years.
Yeah.
So Deal was like, we didn't just pop up in 2020 like, oh, we care about, no. Exactly. Yeah, Deal was doing, like, this was a thought, idea, a decade ago,
Mm.
before folks were having these more public conversations. And so that also was important for me because I got hired in 2020. Like, so I'm interrogating what's the real? Because
Mhm.
I'm not gonna be associated with some surface level shit.
Window dressing.
I'm not doing. That's not how. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So I'm very. While I wasn't there in the beginning, the folks that were instrumental that helped Peter. I think about, even though I never met her, the ancestor, Mama Lila Bell, like
Mm.
that it really influenced and shaped and helped really the deal that is evolved today. So yeah, it's important that folks understand, and we take risks. You know, we are a team that is all women of color.
Mm.
Very proud of that, and we are explicit in our work that we are not DEI. We don't even talk about DEI. We are
Mm.
anti-Black racism.
And I love that boldness. And that's one of the key reasons we've been at some of the events around town that are focused in different spaces of
Yeah,
arcs of it.
that's not our lane.
And in reality, I've been always one of the most provocative people, even when I be in my business classes. You got to explain what that means to me. Like me and Anika, and shout out to Anika, always like go a little bit back and forth. It's like we got to quantify what that value is. But if it's not incepted in the culture and the intentionality from the origin and understanding why and how from top to bottom, it's going to be hard to connect. You know what I'm saying? It's something that's immediately rebellious in my favorite art form of hip hop because it's incepted in rebellion. So it's like that's gonna always be there.
Yes.
You know, it's like the minute that a person that's 15 turns on a rap song, that somebody that's 40 is like, I love that. Immediately, it kind of makes the 15-year-old be like, oh man, I gotta listen to some new rap. That ain't what's supposed to be what rapping.
Oh goodness.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
and I think that feel, that culture, and having that understanding, knowing that things could be provocative. So seeing people such as you and Peter, like in more community meetings, like, you know, if this was 40 years ago, you all would be at the expensive galas and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You all will go to a gala, but y'all are gonna be at, you know, Fred Hampton Jr. is gonna be over at Yusef's, and y'all gonna show up over there, and it's like that's not what would have happened 40 years ago
Yeah.
because the culture is shifted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
You know,
I think we are also just primed. Like, I feel like there was, and in some ways there is, not at all related to politics. This season that we were in, I feel like it's shifting, particularly for Black women. Like this moment we were having for a couple of years. I also feel like there are many of us who are willing to take risk, and really try to agitate, or what I like to call purposefully disrupt, for some meaningful change. Not just about the talk, but like, what's the action? What are we doing? And what can we do together? So I'm seeing conversations that facilitate action, and collaboration that feels different to me than I have maybe ever.
and I think it's just so dope that those same connections through Amber, Regina, yourself, and many others, that cohesiveness exists, and it always did exist, but never to the point where you could push in the resources, because that's also one of the things big in me. I'm not one of the I don't break the intergenerational connection. I need my OGs, and I understand sometimes though what they did may not apply to today, but what they did give a platform.
Absolutely.
And it's up to us to pick up that baton and carry it further. So what you speak of is powerful, and you definitely now that I get that full scope and the story,
like now we know
Detroit is different is going to be in effect over there doing something, because we going to connect. I love that. I love that.
Yes. Let's do that.
So with that being said, thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. This has been a blast.
Oh yeah, you coming back? We gonna be doing something.
Okay.
Disrupting.
I'm looking forward to it. Y'all get ready.
It sounds like we gonna put y'all on helping with me and Yusuf planning. He was like, yeah, we gotta do something different with the state of Black Detroit. So it sounds like we may have already in the inception as we kick around.
Let's figure it out.
Okay.
And it don't need to be me. We got some badass fellows, so I don't need to be the one.
I'm with it.
Yeah.
I'm with it.
Let's make it happen.
I'm with it. Teamwork make the dream work.
All day, every day.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.
Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.